Hey woodworkers. Alright, so I cleaned up the edge here and then I was recording this video and I ran into a small problem where I got some tear out right in the front. So I need to re-record this and talk to you about the process, and I'll walk you through what I ran into here and how I'm going to correct it. But now I have tabletops all veneered, trimmed off the excess veneer so I can start getting accurate measurements from the back towards the front. And then, if you remember, we kept this template piece before we started gluing on solid wood edging. So this template will function as my final shaping. And so this outside edge is already being ferried out and smoothed. I just need to now transfer this to the tabletop. Pardon me. So in order to do so, I've loaded the router table with a flush cutting bit here. So the bearing is on top, cutter's below. The height is set so that it's going to engage onto the template. So I can start cutting this there shortly. The thing about this is I need to hold this template to my tabletop. And I need to do it in such a way that it's not going to leave any marks or damages or compromise this now, not delicate, but more delicate than if it were solid wood surface. So what I'm going to be doing is using a brad nailer. So this is an 18 gauge brad nailer. There are, get this right. There's also smaller diameter. They're 23 gauge brads as well, and you can get them in a gun as well. The thing about those is that when you drive them in, they'll hold up just fine. But when I need to remove this whole thing, those 23 gauge tend to shear or snap off, and they'll leave a little bit of that brad embedded into this material. So I definitely don't want that. The other thing I don't want to do is I don't want to leave any signatures of any holes from brad nails on this surface. So what I'm going to be doing is flipping this upside down. And now it's upside down, the good face is facing down, but more importantly, with doing that trick, I need to remember to also flip my template so that this is all facing in the correct orientation. This is especially true if you've got an asymmetrical design for the top. So we're doing this. The other question that I think many of you will probably ask is, why not just use double stick tape? Double stick tape is great. We can't clamp this. The clamps are going to raise this thing up, they're going to get in the way, they're awkward and clunky, and it just doesn't really work for this application. Double stick tape is totally fine, except I don't want to tempt fate in shearing that off. I don't want to pull any of this veneer away, and I guess that could happen. It really has a lot to do with how much pressure you apply to that tape when you stick these things on. The other thing that's a little bit fussy about the tape is the alignment. So if I were to put spots of tape onto our template and then drive this thing down, I can only really eyeball it with this elevated. And then once I drop it down, and then start putting pressure, that's kind of it. So I want to avoid any of that. I want to have some options as far as adjustments and alignment. So that brings us back to the 18 gauge nails. Okay, so flipping this upside down, I have a center mark here on the template. I've got these lines to align with the outside edges of this tabletop, so I should be able to line these things up there, there, and there. The other thing I've done is I've measured from the back equidistant marks at the same location, so 5 1/4, 5 3/8, 5 1/2. So by doing that, I'll be able to sight down and see what line it is I want to cut to. And that's about where I want to be. Alright, cool. That looks great. Okay. Center line and end lines are set, so I'm good. Alright, now I'm going to start nailing. Probably only need 3. Now this thing is on there, and when we're ready to pull this thing off, you'll see that it's not going to really give us any ill effects except for the small holes in the bottom. Okay. Pardon me. So One other thing which is hugely beneficial is having an extension of this template. So there's no material under here. This does extend. So when I start the cut, given the rotation of the router bit, I'll be able to slide this in. So the template now is engaged with the bearing, not the cutter. It's always dangerous. Well, dangerous is not the right word. It's always exciting when you engage the cutter first before the bearing, because if I were to plunge this cut here, the wood is going to have a tendency of kind of jumping all over the place until I can control it and get that bearing engaged in the template. And so what I'm trying to avoid is any excitement in this, a la this. So that's one thing. So if I've done this, then I can run this over the router relatively easily. You'll probably notice that this reiterates the importance of trimming down the excess material here before you apply the veneer, because the router table, and certainly this application, is much more of a finishing operation. It's not so much a removal of heavy material thing. And that brings me to this problem when it was happening here. I left a little bit extra on this front section, and if you remember, we were gluing these edge pieces down. This alignment was more or less parallel to the back, and then it started to follow this curve with that grain direction. So when this was most vulnerable, it was also the widest section of the solid wood edging. So that when I was transitioning, I don't know if you can see it from back there, but you can kind of see where I stopped the cut and then I had some tear out. I still have this piece, I can glue it on, it's just the veneer is mangled, so it doesn't really make any sense to re-glue this. But the transition of this piece to the other one changes grain direction, and it also is teed up pretty tall. So I'm going to, I also changed to a larger diameter bit. So I'm going to be able to clear chips easier with this 1/2 inch than the 1/4 inch flush cutting bit that I had. But more importantly, I'm going to put in this starter pin into the router, and you just really need to get this finger tight. I could put a screwdriver on that, but that's all I need to do. So what this will allow me to do is tip into the cut if I get into a situation where it's starting to take off more material than I really want. And I'm going to treat these areas fairly delicately. There's not a lot of material over here, so I think I can go right off of the template and cut around. And then I'll just slow down here and revisit this cut. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. Fingers crossed. Here we go. Alright, so that all went much better. I'm not sure if you can see this. I'll probably pick this up. I'm still not quite deep enough with my template, so I do need to slide this back. I'm trying to maximize the overall width of this tabletop. So I'll have to pull this off and recut until I'm done with this. But this is a really smooth, easy cut here. I think larger bits made all the difference. What I'm running into is I'm running out of space over here, so I need to change the angle by which I'm cutting, and so that's why I need to remove the starter pin. Router bit doesn't really matter alignment in relationship to the bed. It's all circular, so I can locate this cut pretty easily. Alright, exciting than the first time I did this, which is great. That's exactly what I wanted. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to point out here is, I hope you can see that I've got some tear out on this outside edge, and that was expected. That was kind of by design. The reason that I'm not worried about that, and it could be much worse, but I'm not worried about that because if you remember, this is the outside dimension of the tabletop itself. So whatever tear out that I got, I'll just trim that off. I'll just cut it so all that goes away. And you're only really going to get the tear out on the end of the cut, given the rotation of this bit. So it'll be right there. No tear out at all over on this end because, well, it's all supported as that router is cutting. Okay, so I'm happy with this. I do need to do this one more time. I still have plenty of width, and we're only taking off another 1/8 of an inch at the most, so I'm happy. Alright, so the last step here is removing this template. I would encourage you not to use any type of a prying tool, putty knife, whatever, but because I have this extra extension here, this acts as leverage. That goes away. And then, not sure if you can see any of the little detents here that have been made, those holes that we've created. Those are an easy thing to sand down, but because it's on the bottom of the table, the apron of the table is basically going to interact with that. So it'll be mostly hidden. Once we've done that, then I'm ready for the next steps. Alright, hopefully that was helpful.